want to thank you for being here for our brief webinar on the Title III Recent Immigrant Grant. Alan and I invited you to this webinar. If you are a current recipient or if you have carryover funds from last year and need to submit another application in order to continue using your funds this school year. There is a tiny URL on the screen that you can get a copy of this PowerPoint or presentation on if you go to it. After the webinar, I will email this out to all those who were invited so that you can refer back to it as you need to. We will have a time for questions near the end, but please put the questions in the chat box as we go so that you can ask things as we go. Because if there's something really you need to know, I'd rather just address it as we go, but there will be a chance at the end to ask questions. Alan is on the call as well, so I think mainly I'm the one sharing, but Alan, at any time, feel free to jump in, okay? Okay. We will talk about how you were selected for the Title III Recent Immigrant Grant. We will talk about where the subgrant application is located in IndiStar. We will show you where the subgrant guidance is, where a sample budget form is, and show you the checklist that we use to review the applications as we're in the process of accepting them. They are due on January 17th. Please communicate with us. We will work with you on that, but we will start reviewing them at that time. As you probably know, your state co-coordinators for this grant are myself and Alan Lytle. And the way that we determined who qualified for a Title III Recent Immigrant Education Grant is it's determined in November based on the Cycle 2 Recent Immigrant Count compared to the prior 2 years of recent immigrant count. So the first thing we do is we see who has at least 15 recent immigrants. And of those who had 15 recent immigrants in the current year, who experienced at least a 35% increase over the average of their number of recent immigrants from the prior 2 years. Then the number of students that you have this year has to be able to generate at least a $10,000 grant. So once we applied all of that, we had to narrow it down to actually the minimum count for 2019-20 was 96 recent immigrants. So even though to get in the first round, you had to have 15 to be considered, when it came down to it, in order to have enough students to qualify for the grant, you had to have at least 96 recent immigrants in the 19-20 school year. So these are the districts, excuse me, who qualified in the 19-20 school year. We welcome Little Rock to the group this year. They are new to this grant for this school year. They weren't in it last year, at least. Prior to that, was before Alan and I were co-coordinating, and before the current application was being used. Conway, North Little Rock, Batesville, and Green Forest all, I believe, had grants last year, and they qualified again for a grant this year. And you can see that your grant amount here is what we projected it to be. The actual allotments on the federal grants page, which is basically the same numbers. So you can see for your recent immigrants, you ended up receiving $122.76 for each recent immigrant in the current school year. This is the finance info about the source of funds and the revenue code. You have to obligate the funds that are issued for this school year by September 30th, 2021, and you have to liquidate them by December 10th, 2021. So you'll see that it's for this school year and the next school year and potentially the very beginning of the next school year that this grant can cover. And those of you who have carryover funds, your carryover from last year's allotment, you can just subtract a year from this. for the obligation deadline for the funds you received last year. So where do you find the application? It is located in Industar. You go to your district where it says to complete forms, and it's in the Federal Programs Forms section. And you can see it's called the Application for Title III Recent Immigrant Subgrant. It's right there. You would click on it. It has over here in the right-hand column that it is due January 17th. And it does mention on here that only those who've been notified that you qualify for this grant should submit it. You are one of the ones who qualified, so you should be submitting that grant there. Within the subgrant itself, when you get into it, there is a link. You know, there's the regular information about, you know, indicating the district and LEA you're with, the contact information for your Title III coordinator, ESOL coordinator, and federal programs coordinator. You should all be working together on this. We highly encourage you sit down in the same room, if at all possible, to discuss how you're going to use the funds so that you ensure that you have a cohesive and program that fits in with all of what you're doing, and that everyone who potentially is impacted by it understands what is going on. And one thing we'll talk about in a minute is how that what you say in your application has to match what you have in your budget, and what you have in your budget has to match what's in your application. And we know that sometimes different roles up here play a different part. Some talk more about, you know, describing how you're using the funds, and some are more involved with the budgeting aspect of the funds. We just highly encourage you to all work together so that it's a cohesive application and implementation of your grant. But I will go ahead and link to the grant guidance. Here, it's on the PowerPoint as well, because we're going to review that. Make that a little larger for you to be. We base this guidance on information we receive from federal Title III people, and this is what helps guide what we can do with the funds. This is a reminder of what the definition of a recent immigrant is. This is defined in Section 3201 of Title III. And there were basically three qualifications here. One, that they're 3 to 21. The second, that they're not born in any state. And the third, that they have not been attending one or more schools in any one or more states for more than 3 full academic years. And that is cumulative, not consecutive. The term state here means each of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. So they can't have been attending schools in those areas. Notice this is not necessarily directly tied to English learners. I think for the vast majority of you, I didn't go check, I think most of your recent immigrants also happen to be English learners, but theoretically some may not be. There are we are able to authorize special subgrants for districts that have a significant increase in the percentage or number of recent immigrant students. We already talked about how we define that. In Arkansas, we define that as you have at least 15 and that you've had a 35% increase over the prior year at least. Then this one is, can you receive a subgrant based on the number of English learners and the number of recent immigrants? Yes, and I believe all of you also qualify for the regular Title III subgrant. This is a separate grant from that. Then are there special required activities for you for LEAs that receive grants under this? And notice that you must provide enhanced instructional opportunities for recent immigrant children and youth, which may include, this one you have a variety of things you can choose from. You don't have to provide every single one of these, but you may include these. If it's not on here, you probably shouldn't be doing it. You can talk to us case by case if you have an idea that's not on here. One of them is family literacy, parent and family outreach. So activities to help the parents and families become active participants in the education of their children. Sometimes recent immigrants have special needs, and the parents do, related to maybe even learning about the U.S. school system, becoming more aware of their role in parent-teacher conferences, and et cetera. It could also be helping them learn English or helping them learn ways that they can help their child in school. It could be used for recruitment of and support for personnel, including teachers and paraprofessionals who've been trained or are being trained. It can be providing tutorials, mentoring, and academic or career counseling for this group of students. It can be identifying the identification, development, and acquisition of curricular materials or software to be used in the program. And it can be basic instruction services that are directly attributable to the presence of immigrant children. So some of that, you know, I've seen some of you have a summer program that you've done for your recent immigrants or after school program. And so sometimes that might have costs such as additional classroom supplies or transportation or things like that that are directly attributable to these basic instruction services. Other services you might want to do, instructional services, programs introducing the educational system, civics education, and then comprehensive community services. Those are activities that you might coordinate with some community-based organizations, institutes of higher ed, private sector entities, just anyone who has expertise in working with immigrants to perhaps assist parents and families of immigrant children. We encourage you, and so is U.S. Department of Ed, to prioritize the activities that will meet the unique needs of the students you have. So the type of recent immigrant you have, you need to look at the needs they have. If you have a lot of refugee students, that would perhaps be different need than those who happen to be coming because there's a high college environment in your area. Or if you have a lot of students who are, I just forgot the term for it, who are unaccompanied minors, that might be a specific need that you need to work on, and the different social needs and educational needs that they have. So look at the students you have. You might have some that have limited prior education, and so you might need to be providing some intervention or some instructional services to help bridge the gap in their education because of that limited prior education and being a recent immigrant. So just keep in mind what the needs are that you have and then design activities with these funds around those needs. You do have to submit an application for how you propose using this, and you have to include a description of how you're going to do that. The definition of 3 full academic years, I mentioned earlier that it's cumulative, so an academic year is 9 to 10 months. You kind of count up the number of months they've been in school, but it can't add up to more than 3 full academic years. That's where we're talking about it's a cumulative time, not a consecutive time. There are some resources that I would encourage you to look into that's been provided by the U.S. Department of Ed to help you. There is a U.S. Department of Ed immigration webpage that you can link on. There's a newcomer toolkit as well that is the second link here that might give you some ideas of how you can support recent immigrants, refugees, and their families in a successful integration process. Then the Council of Chief State School Officers released a report. The English Learner State Collaborative helped develop it on understanding and supporting the educational needs of recently arrived English learners. So one of the things that this addresses is it really talks about who are these students, what are their needs, and what are some practices being implemented to support them. So that might be something that you could look at to get some ideas of how to utilize your funds. Be creative with this. It is an opportunity to do some unique things for this group of students, and I would encourage you to dig into that and see what would fit your community and your school district. As you're working on that, if you'd like to brainstorm things or run ideas by Alan and I, we'd be glad to help you with that. But it does need to fit the needs of your district. So I ran through all that. Are there questions about the guidance? Okay, I don't hear any right now, so I'll go back to the presentation. If I can get my mouse to get up there. Okay. As part of the application, you have a link in here that talks about uploading a copy of the district's proposed Title III Recent Immigrant Subgrant budget. I thought I meant to replace this screenshot. You actually will upload it in the current year documents folder in Indostar, not in the Title III folder. Put it in the 1920 folder for documents. Then on here you can see a sample budget. So on that, this is a sample one. You don't have to use this one, but this one does help us clearly see what it is you're submitting. And this kind of budget would be clear to us. You put your name up here. You would show what your allotment was for the current year, what your carryover amount, so the total amount you need to budget. And then in here, you would indicate the budget string, the expenditure category, and a brief explanation, but with enough verbiage in there, we can tie it back to your application. Okay. One comment we will always remind you of, if you are going to be getting Chromebooks or any kind of technology, they cannot be used for ALPA 21 purposes. So that guidance applies to this grant as well as the regular Title III grant. Are there any questions about the budget form? Okay, I'll go back over here. So you'll see in Indostar where you go submit the budget, there is a folder up in the upper right-hand corner. It looks like a folder, file folder. You click on it and you will actually submit it right here on the 2019-20 form uploads. Please submit your budget there. It helps the state archive everything when we put it in the year-by-year folder. What we look at when we review your application, you must choose at least one activity for this program, and you indicate in your application which one. You don't have to do all of them. In fact, you probably won't have enough money to do all of them. So choose at least one activity. You'll describe how you're going to carry out the activities you choose in question 1. Then you will describe how you're ensuring you're only using these funds for immigrant children and youth. It's not meant to just serve all English learners or to run your summer school program for any kid. It does have to be focused on immigrant children and youth, and that you are indicating on there that you are supplementing and not supplanting. And you can describe that so in your application. Then you have a plan to measure the effectiveness of the program. So you indicate in the evaluation piece how you're going to measure the effectiveness of it. And you will describe, if you serve students in non-public schools, how you'll support recent immigrant students in those schools. If it's not applicable, indicate you don't serve students in non-public schools, and that your budget detail matches your application. This checklist, I'm not going to open it up because it just is basically those 7 things on one document. So the key points, this grant is fairly easy, especially compared to the regular Title III grant. You choose at least one grant activity. Make sure your budget matches the activity or activities. Focus on the needs of your recent immigrant students and collaborate with your federal program coordinator, Title III coordinator, and ESOL coordinator if you're not the same role. When some of you serve multiple roles and some of you have all these divided up. And the due date is January 17th in InduStar to be submitted. Do you have any questions? Any questions at all? Okay, well, as you go, I know sometimes it's one of those things that when you get in there, you may develop questions, and that's okay. We're here to help you. As you know, Alan and I are here to assist you as you're working on developing your grant. We're the ones that review the grants. Likewise, we have staff out there at several different co-ops. Your Title III and ESOL person probably knows who your EL specialist is for your region, but they would also be willing to support you as you're working on this, and you can contact them. So if we don't have any questions, we're going.
Hey, Tricia, I did have a question.
Yes.
And I might have missed that part, but if we have carryover, do we have to complete a new application?
Yes, there are the districts that have carryover that don't have a new allotment still need to submit. So I think Benton and Bryant both had a significant carryover and need to complete a new application to continue using the funds.
Okay, same deadline, January?
Yes, same deadline.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Good question. Any other questions? No. Well, thank you for coming. Feel free to reach out to Alan or I or any of the specialists as you're working on this, and we'll assist you as we can. And I hope you and your family enjoy a great holiday season coming up. Thank you very much.